Where's the apartment I gave you, Mavis? Harold Whitmore's voice cut through the damp morning haze like the sharp snap of a bone. Mavis didn't answer. She stirred faintly beneath the heap. Her body curled tight, as if it had forgotten how to unfold. Her cheeks were sunken, her lips dry and cracked. The corners split with blood. A purplish bruise bloomed beneath her left eye. Her hair, once coiled and crowned with pride, now hung in greasy, tangled ropes. She blinked against the light, eyes wide but vacant, as though even recognizing the voice required too much. He took a step closer. "Mavis," he said again, lower, hoarser. "Where is the apartment I gave you?" She tried to sit up, but her arms shook, barely able to lift her weight. Her gaze met his for just a second, then dropped, and slowly, in silence, she lifted the hem of her shirt. Harold inhaled sharply. Scars, dozens of them, angry red burns seared across her ribcage. Faint purple welts coiled like ropes across her abdomen. Crisscrossing cuts from a blade, shallow but deliberate. The bruises on her arms were fresh, and below them, older injuries healed wrong, ignored, forgotten. He staggered back half a step. Not in horror, but in rage and heartbreak. Behind him, the door to the Bentley opened. Jerome Boone, Harold's personal investigator, stepped out. Tall, barrel-chested, mid-50s, former FBI. Jerome had seen more than enough pain in his lifetime to stay calm, but even he clenched his fists at the sight. "Dear God," Harold muttered, but Mavis didn't flinch. She didn't look at him anymore. She just let the shirt fall back down and turned her face away. What Harold didn't know, what no one saw, was how she got here. Just 12 hours earlier, she had walked the downtown strip, moving from one overlit fast food place to the next, trying to hold her chin up, to look safe. She'd asked gently, quietly, "Please, could I have $1 for a sandwich?" She wasn't aggressive, she wasn't loud, but they looked at her like she was disease. "Get a job. Crackhead. You people ruin everything." A man in a blue Ford had thrown a half-empty coffee cup at her. She didn't duck fast enough. The hot liquid hit her shoulder and soaked through the thin fabric of her shirt. A woman at a taco truck told her to leave before she called the cops. "You're scaring my customers," she hissed. Later that night, she sat outside a gas station, knees pulled to her chest, too hungry to think. She hadn't eaten in 2 days. She tried to rest her eyes for just a moment, but a group of young men had approached 3 of them. Loud, laughing, they circled her like wolves. One grabbed her bag, another pushed her. "You smell like piss, girl." She tried to stand, but one of them shoved her hard in the chest. She stumbled back, fell, and hit the dumpster behind her with a hollow thud. Her head struck metal, then the ground, then nothing. That was where Jerome had found her, curled like a question mark in the filth. He'd watched for a full day before calling Harold. Needed to be sure. Now, Harold was staring down at the girl he'd raised. The girl who used to bring him lemon pie on Sunday afternoons, singing old Motown songs under her breath in the kitchen. And now she was half a ghost. He took off his coat and walked toward her. "Mavis," he said again, more gently. "It's me, Granddaddy." Her eyes flicked to his face, unsure. Her body stiffened, almost recoiling trauma etched in every flinch, every glance over her shoulder. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said softly. "I never stopped looking." She swallowed hard. Her throat worked around the dryness like it hurt just to breathe. Her voice came out as a whisper. You didn't believe me." "I didn't know," he answered. "But I do now, and I'm here to take you home." Her lips trembled. "I don't have a home." Harold's voice cracked. "Yes, you do." He stepped forward slowly and wrapped his coat around her, careful not to startle her. It dwarfed her frame. She looked down at her hands, dirt under every fingernail, and said nothing. But she didn't pull away. Jerome opened the car door. "We've got a hospital ready." Private entrance. Harold nodded, guiding Mavis into the Bentley like she was made of glass. She didn't speak for the entire ride. The city passed by miles of billboard promises, neon-lit pawn shops, boarded-up churches. Her reflection in the window looked like someone else. Someone broken. Harold's fingers tapped against his knee. His face set like stone. His mind raced, not just through guilt, but fury. What had they done to her? Lydia, Candace, Olivia. He had trusted them, but the evidence, the lies, and now Mavis, broken, beaten, discarded, but not forgotten. At Whitmore Medical Center, the staff waited. Lights dimmed. Dr. Reyes, his most trusted physician, stood ready at the side entrance. Harold climbed out first, then reached in, and offered Mavis his hand. She hesitated, then took it. "Run every test," Harold ordered. "I want full documentation, quiet, discreet." Dr. Reyes nodded solemnly. Before the doors closed, Mavis turned to Harold. Her voice trembled. "Will you stay?" He stepped forward, touched her hand. "I'll be right here, baby girl." As the gurney rolled down the hall, Harold turned to Jerome. "Get me everything," he growled. "On all three of them. I don't care how deep you have to dig." Jerome's jaw tightened. "You'll have it." Harold didn't move for a long time. He stood there, staring down the corridor, the scent of lemon and trash still lingering in his coat. She was alive, and they were going to pay. Like if Mavis's story touched you, and comment where you're watching from. You never know who nearby might be watching with you. The first time Harold Whitmore ever noticed the little girl with the two big shoes and the quiet eyes, she was standing in the back of the church kitchen, watching his wife knead biscuit dough with aching hands. Mavis Green had just turned 12, recently placed with the Whitmores through an unofficial arrangement from the church's charity arm. No fanfare, no legal papers, just a handshake and a nod from Pastor Caldwell. "She's a good one," he'd said. "Smart, shy, needs somewhere stable." All. That had been 12 years ago. Back then, Margaret Whitmore was still alive, still hosting Sunday brunches for half of Houston's black social elite, still wearing pearls to do her gardening, still speaking in that honey-wrapped southern drawl that made strangers feel like friends. She'd taken one look at Mavis, thin, quiet, polite to a fault, and said, "She's not a guest, she's family." But family earns their keep. And with that, Mavis had been given her first apron, a room off the pantry, and the title, house help. Harold hadn't objected. In fact, he barely paid attention. Business kept him busy, especially after the cancer diagnosis had pushed him into building his pharmaceutical empire faster than anyone thought possible. But over the years, something about Mavis began to chip at his well-fortified walls. She was careful, quiet, sharp, and she listened. She remembered how he took his coffee black, one sugar, piping hot. She kept his Sunday Times folded just the way he liked, without the financial section on top. And she never, not once, complained. Not when the other staff called her the orphan. Not when the other neighborhood girls whispered that she was just the help. It was Margaret who taught her to bake. "She has good hands," Margaret had told Harold one afternoon, as they watched Mavis pull a lemon meringue pie from the oven. Gentle hands. Like someone who's used to holding broken things. The pie was perfect, tangy, soft, with a crust that flaked like snow. Harold had eaten 2 slices and asked for a third. Margaret had laughed. Mavis smiled. It was one of the first real smiles he'd ever seen from her. Small, shy, but glowing like a lantern in fog. "She's not like the others," he'd said to Margaret that night. "She doesn't ask for anything." Margaret nodded. "That's exactly why she needs someone to give her something." When Margaret died 2 years later, the house fell into quiet. Harold buried himself in work. Mavis stayed, no longer a child, not quite a woman. She simply continued to exist in the background of his life, making his breakfast, keeping his appointments on the little corkboard in the kitchen, tucking in notes when she noticed his shirts were missing buttons. It wasn't until her high school graduation that he realized just how much she had become a part of him. She stood in the auditorium, valedictorian of her class, in a white dress Margaret had picked out before passing. The crowd applauded as Mavis stepped up to the podium, hands shaking. She spoke about perseverance, about building a future even when your past feels empty. Harold cried. No one saw it, not even her. That night, he gave her a card. Inside was a letter, short, typed, signed in his distinct script, and a set of keys. "To a place of your own," he'd written. so you never have to feel like you don't belong. The apartment was modest but beautiful. One bedroom, furnished, overlooking a park with a small pond. He'd made sure the kitchen had a full oven. For pies, he'd said. Mavis had cried, quietly, as she always did. Then she'd hugged him. He remembered that hug now as he stood in the hallway outside her hospital room. 12 years of memories replaying like an old jazz record, scratched, imperfect, but beloved. Jerome approached with 2 coffees, one black, one with cream and sugar. She's stable, he said. Dr. Reyes says the scans are promising. No internal bleeding. But she's severely malnourished, and the burns, they're going to leave permanent scarring. Harold took the coffee and nodded. What about mental state? PTSD. Deep. They're recommending trauma counseling. It'll be a long road. Daughter. Harold said nothing. Just stared at the door. She ever tell you what happened? Jerome asked gently. Harold's voice was flat. Not yet. A nurse stepped out. Mr. Whitmore? She's asking for you. He pushed the door open. The room smelled of antiseptic and quiet. Mavis lay propped against white pillows, her skin washed, her hair gently combed. A clean hospital gown draped over her still thin frame. She looked like herself, and nothing like herself all at once. Hey, baby girl, he said softly. She looked up. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Why didn't you come sooner? His heart broke all over again. I tried, he said, sitting beside her. But they kept your truth from me. Lied. Hid you. I never stopped looking. She stared down at her bandaged hands. I thought you believed them, that you thought I stole, that I... Her voice cracked. That I was dirty. No, he said firmly. Never. Tears welled in her eyes. They said I wasn't family. You are, they said. No one would care if I disappeared. I care. Silence. Then her voice, so small it trembled. They burned me, cut me, took everything. And when I tried to tell, no one listened. He reached out, gently placing his weathered hand over hers. I'm listening now. And I promise you on everything I've built, on Margaret's name, on mine they will answer for what they did. Mavis looked at him, uncertain, but for the first time in years, she allowed herself to believe. He stayed with her until she fell asleep, her hand still in his. When Jerome returned, Harold's eyes were closed, but his mind was racing. We start tonight, he said without opening them. Start with Lydia. Bank records. Property sales. Every call she's made in 2 years. Jerome nodded. What are you hoping to find? Harold opened his eyes. Proof that this wasn't just betrayal. He stood, buttoned his coat. I want evidence of war. Harold had never been a man prone to loneliness. He was raised during a time when men were taught to make peace with silence, to find comfort in order, in duty, in things that did not speak back. After Margaret's death, he had grown used to the emptiness of the house, the echo of footsteps, the absence of laughter, the cold side of the bed. But when Lydia came into his life, all of that changed. She arrived like spring after a long winter, beautiful, poised, generous to a fault, at least in public. She ran a charity that provided medical equipment to underfunded rural clinics, which Harold's foundation had sponsored for 3 consecutive years. She was younger, by nearly 30 years, but she had a way of speaking that reminded him of Margaret. Not the words, but the rhythm, controlled, genteel, practiced. They were married within 9 months of their first meeting. Mavis was 17 at the time. She had stood silently at the back of the wedding reception in the garden, dressed in a simple, pale blue dress Margaret had once worn. Harold had offered to buy her something new, something special for the occasion, but Mavis had declined. This one's good, she'd said. It smells like her. That should have been a moment of joy, but instead, that was when the shift began. Lydia had watched Mavis that day not with warmth or curiosity, but with calculation. She asked the staff who the girl was, and when she learned that Mavis had lived with Harold for nearly 6 years, that she had been raised in the house, eaten at the same table, even once traveled with him to a medical conference in Chicago, her expression changed. She calls you Granddaddy, Lydia had remarked with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She's like a granddaughter to me, Harold replied. She's been with us since Margaret was alive. Windine. Lydia nodded, slowly, and that was the end of the conversation, or so Harold thought. From that day forward, small changes began to creep in like mold under fine wallpaper. Mavis's hours were shifted. No more dinners at the main table. She was asked to eat with the staff again, despite the fact that she had just been accepted to Houston College with a full scholarship. Her laundry was moved from the upstairs closet to the small utility room in the back. Her name was no longer spoken freely in the house. "She's a sweet girl," Harold said one night. Lydia stirred her tea. "She's grown now. Time for her to have her own life. She has one. Here." Lydia smiled, but said nothing. Then came Candace and Olivia, Lydia's daughters from a previous marriage. Candace, 20, was in her junior year at a liberal arts college in Massachusetts. Olivia, 17, still in high school, carried herself like a debutante in training. Both moved into the Whitmore estate within weeks of Lydia and Harold's wedding, and both took an immediate disliking to Mavis. "She thinks she's better than us," Candace muttered behind closed doors. "She's not even real family," Olivia added. They never said these things to Harold directly. In front of him, they were polite, effervescent, even. But behind his back, Mavis was their target. At first, it was subtle. Books missing from Mavis's shelves, her carefully ironed uniforms wrinkled and tossed on the floor, Candace accidentally using her toothbrush, Olivia borrowing her notebooks and returning them with pages torn out. Mavis said nothing, not even to Harold, but he noticed the change in her. She no longer sang in the mornings, no longer brought him his coffee just the way he liked it. She still smiled, but it was tight, uncertain, like she was measuring how much of herself to reveal. One afternoon, Harold walked into the sitting room and found Mavis kneeling on the floor, scrubbing a wine stain from the carpet with tears running down her face. Lydia and Candace stood nearby, laughing about a spa appointment. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice sharp. The laughter stopped. "Mavis had a little accident," Lydia said smoothly. "Spilled a glass of wine. She insisted on cleaning it herself." "She doesn't clean carpets," Harold said. "She said she didn't mind," Lydia replied, her voice syrupy. "Didn't you, dear?" Mavis nodded slowly, eyes downcast. He wanted to say something, demand they leave her alone. But something held him back. Pride, confusion, doubt. He didn't know the full story. And Lydia was his wife now. That night, as he sat alone in the study, Harold stared at a photograph on his desk. It was from a fundraiser 4 years ago. Margaret on one side, Harold in the middle, Mavis on the other, holding a tray of lemon tarts. They were all smiling. He hadn't seen her smile like that in months. It was a cold realization. Something in the house had shifted, and he didn't know how to stop it. He found her in the kitchen the next morning, prepping his breakfast like she always had. "Good morning, Granddaddy," she said softly. He looked at her hands. The knuckles were red, raw. "Did they hurt you?" She looked at him, startled, then forced a smile. "No, just cleaning too hard." He stared at her for a long time. "Don't ever lie to me," he said gently. Her eyes flickered. "Yes, sir." He wanted to ask more, to push. But a part of him foolishly still believed that if it were serious, she would tell him, so he let it go, for now. But later that week, when he caught Lydia on the phone whispering, "She's too close to him," he began to wonder if perhaps something darker had already taken root. The sun filtered softly through the tall windows of the breakfast room, casting golden patterns over the white linen tablecloth. It was the morning of Mavis's 21st birthday. The Whitmore estate was unusually quiet that day. No laughter from the parlor, no idle chatter of staff, just the faint clinking of silverware as Mavis poured Harold's coffee black, 1 sugar, just the way he liked it. She had grown into a woman so gradually, so quietly, that Harold often forgot the girl who once peered over the kitchen counter to learn how to whisk egg whites had become the poised young woman standing before him now. She carried herself with a natural grace, dressed modestly, always observant. Mavis had a calm strength about her, an ability to endure, to adapt, to survive. And yet, in that moment, Harold saw something else in her eyes. Weariness, not the kind born from physical exhaustion. No, this was deeper. Emotional fatigue. The kind that builds over time when you've been forced to live between two worlds, never fully part of either. Harold cleared his throat. Do you have plans today, Mavis? She looked up from the teacups she was arranging. Just class this morning. Then I thought I'd stop by the community center to help with tutoring. He nodded slowly. That's good. After that, I want you to meet me at the medical plaza downtown. Around 4. She tilted her head, confused. Is everything all right? He smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. Everything's fine. I just have something to show you. When she arrived later that afternoon, Harold was waiting in the lobby of a new high-rise just outside Memorial Park. The doorman greeted her by name, a detail that didn't go unnoticed. He took her upstairs himself, his hand resting lightly on the small of her back, and led her to a door marked 21B. Go on, he said. Open it. She hesitated, then turned the key he'd given her earlier that day. The door swung open. Sunlight poured into a bright, spacious studio. Hardwood floors. A small but elegant kitchen with marble countertops. A desk beneath a wide window. A queen-sized bed dressed in fresh linens. On the table sat a single envelope and a small lemon meringue pie. Mavis stood frozen in the doorway, unable to breathe for a moment. Harold stepped inside, watching her reaction carefully. It's yours, he said. All of it. She turned to him, stunned. Mine? He nodded. You're 21 now. You've earned this. A place of your own. So you never again have to live where you feel like a guest in your own life. Her throat tightened. I don't know what to say. Don't say anything, he said gently. Just know it's yours. No strings, no expectations. .coms to lead. She walked slowly through the space, running her fingers along the kitchen counter, touching the edge of the neatly folded comforter on the bed. It was quiet, safe, real. I've never had a place that was mine, she whispered. Now you do. Tears welled in her eyes, and she turned quickly, embarrassed to let him see. But Harold stepped forward and placed a hand on her shoulder. You are not the help, Mavis, he said quietly. You never were. I should have made that clear a long time ago. Action desus. She looked up at him, stunned. I let them treat you like you were invisible. He continued. I didn't stop it. That's on me. But I see you now. And I want you to know whatever happens, you always have this. A home. A future. She hugged him then, for the first time in years. Not the cautious, half-hearted embrace of a girl unsure of her place, but the tight, trembling grip of someone who had held her heart together with stitches and prayers, now finally letting it soften. Harold hugged her back. Margaret would be proud of you, he said. I know I am. They sat for a while, eating the pie. It wasn't perfect, Mavis had rushed it, she confessed, between class and her bus ride, but it still held the same tart sweetness that Harold remembered from long ago. Later that evening, as the sky darkened outside her new window, Harold stood to leave. You'll be all right? He asked. She smiled, nodding. More than all right? 9. He gave her one last look, a father's look, full of pride and protectiveness, and stepped out the door. What he didn't see, as the elevator doors closed behind him, was Mavis sitting on the floor with her back against the bed, pie tin still in her lap, crying quietly into her hands. Because for the first time, she believed just for a moment that she was worth more than how the world saw her. But that moment wouldn't last. Later that week, Lydia found the envelope. Harold had left it on his study desk by accident. Property transfer documents, signed and sealed. 1 unit, 21B, titled in Mavis Green's name. No mortgage, no rent, a gift. Lydia stared at the papers for a long time, then poured herself a drink. She's a servant, she muttered aloud. Not his daughter. When Candace and Olivia came home that evening, she handed them the file. We have a problem, Lydia said, voice low. And we're going to fix it. Mavis awoke early in her new apartment, sunlight creeping through the gauzy white curtains. For the first time in years, there was no clanging of pots, no barking orders, no rushed footsteps outside her bedroom door. Only stillness. She stretched quietly, letting her body savor the comfort of clean sheets, of silence, of safety. She hadn't realized how tightly she had been wound until the tension began to ease. Her bruises were fading, her back still ached, but for once, she wasn't sleeping on a mattress that sagged or on the cold tile floor of a laundry room. The apartment smelled like lemon and pine. She'd spent the previous afternoon cleaning every inch of it, not because it was dirty, but because she needed to make it hers. With each wiped counter and organized drawer, she felt a layer of her past wash away. On the kitchen table, the remains of the lemon meringue pie sat beneath plastic wrap. She smiled faintly as she passed it on her way to the small kitchenette to make coffee. Her phone buzzed. One new text from Harold. "I'm proud of you. Come by this weekend. I want you to help me plan the new clinic in Beaumont." Her heart swelled. He hadn't said those words often, but when he did, they stuck like gold threads in the fabric of her memory. She replied simply, "Yes, Granddaddy." That was Wednesday. By Friday morning, she was gone. "She didn't show up?" Harold asked, rising from his chair in the Whitmore Foundation conference room. Jerome shook his head. "No calls, no texts. Her phone's been off since Thursday night. I sent someone to the apartment. Door was locked, no sign of forced entry. Everything looked normal." Harold's face darkened. "She wouldn't just leave." "No," Jerome agreed. "She wouldn't." Harold stepped to the window, staring down at the bustling Houston skyline. "Did you check security cameras? Building only has exterior surveillance. Footage shows her entering Thursday night around 8:30 p.m., carrying groceries. No footage of her leaving afterward. No visitors recorded." Harold turned slowly. "What about Lydia?" Jerome hesitated. "She left town yesterday morning. Said she was visiting a friend in Austin. Took the girls with her." "And you believe that?" "I don't believe anything anymore," Jerome said grimly. Harold moved quickly now. He called Dr. Reyes. Called the building manager. Called 2 board members with connections in Houston PD. Within the hour, he was inside Mavis's apartment with Jerome and a private forensic tech. There was no sign of struggle. No broken glass. No spilled items. The groceries she carried in Thursday night were still in the fridge. Milk. Apples. Eggs. Her bed was neatly made. But on the floor, beside the dresser, Harold noticed something. A single shoe, one of the black flats she wore often. The left one was still tucked under the edge of the bed. The right lay sideways near the wall, as if dropped in a hurry. Jerome knelt beside it. No dust under it. Wasn't there long. Harold's throat tightened. She was taken. Jerome didn't argue. That night, Lydia returned from Austin, or so she claimed. She swept into the house like royalty, wearing oversized sunglasses and a fresh manicure. Olivia and Candace followed closely behind, chatting about some brunch spot in San Antonio. Their laughter echoed through the marble foyer. "Where's Harold?" Lydia asked the butler. "Boyd." "In the study, ma'am." She found him there, lights dimmed, a glass of bourbon in his hand. "Welcome back," he said without looking up. "You could sound a little happier to see me," she replied, hanging her coat over the back of the antique chair. He looked at her now, slowly, like he was seeing her through new eyes. "I have a question for you," he said quietly. She smiled. "Only one. Where's Mavis?" Lydia blinked, thrown off. "How should I know? She's missing." A pause. "Oh? No calls. No texts. She didn't leave a note. Her phone is off. Her groceries untouched. Her bed made. Her shoes still there, except one. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you?" Lydia's brow furrowed, but her voice remained light. "Of course not. That's horrible. Have you called the police?" "I don't need the police," Harold said. "I have Jerome." Lydia's smile faded slightly. "Harold, are you suggesting I had something to do with this?" "I'm suggesting," he said slowly, "that from the moment you walked into this house, Mavis's life began to fall apart. And now that she finally has something of her own, she disappears." "You're being emotional." "No," he said, standing. "I'm being careful. I didn't protect her before. I won't make that mistake again." She opened her mouth to speak, but he had already turned away. 2 days passed. No word, no sightings, but then, a break. Jerome arrived at Harold's office late Monday night with a USB drive and a look that made Harold's blood run cold. I pulled street cam footage from 2 blocks down from Mavis's building, Jerome said. Check this out. He inserted the drive into Harold's computer. The footage played. A grainy view of the street behind the building. A black SUV pulled up just past midnight. 2 figures stepped out, both wearing dark hoodies. One opened the back hatch. At 12:12 a.m., a figure emerged from the alley behind the building. She was barefoot, stumbling, arms bound. It was Mavis. Harold leaned forward, heart hammering. The 2 figures grabbed her quickly. One opened the back door. She tried to scream, her head turned but was shoved inside. The SUV drove off. Jerome paused the video. Plates are blurred. They used covers. But the vehicle model? Registered to a shell company linked to Lydia's family trust. Harold's fists clenched. Get me more. Everything. You sure you don't want to go to the police? Harold stood, voice low, furious. No. The police will slow us down. He turned to the window, eyes burning with fire. If they hurt her, Jerome, if they did anything, they'll pay. Jerome finished. And this time, Harold didn't whisper it. Mavis came back to herself in pieces. First, there was pain, sharp, blinding, everywhere at once. Then the cold. Concrete pressed against her cheek. Her wrists burned, bound so tightly that her fingers tingled and went numb. When she tried to move, her body answered with a jolt of agony that stole the breath from her lungs. She didn't scream. She couldn't. Something rough was tied around her mouth, tasting of dust and old fabric. Her head throbbed with every heartbeat. A deep, nauseating ache that reminded her of the moment she'd been shoved. Of metal and darkness rushing up to meet her. Dumpster, her mind supplied dimly. She opened her eyes. The room was unfinished. Bare bulbs hung from the ceiling, casting harsh white light over concrete walls. A basement. No windows she could see. The air smelled of bleach and dampness, sharp enough to sting her nose. Footsteps approached. Mavis's body reacted before her mind did. Her muscles tensed. Her breathing quickened. Panic flooding her system so fast it felt like drowning. Her vision tunneled. Her heart slammed against her ribs, desperate to escape. PTSD had taught her this reflex. The body remembered what the mind tried to forget. The door opened. Lydia stepped inside first. She wore jeans and a cream-colored sweater, her hair pulled back neatly, her face calm, almost serene. Candace followed, chewing gum, eyes glittering with something cruel and eager. Olivia lingered near the door, arms crossed, watching with thinly veiled disgust. Well, Lydia said lightly, as if stepping into a kitchen rather than a place of captivity. She's awake. Mavis's breath hitched. Her eyes locked onto Lydia's face, pleading without words. Lydia crouched in front of her, heels clicking softly on the concrete. You really should have been grateful, she said. Do you know how embarrassing it was for Harold to flaunt that apartment? People were starting to ask questions. Mavis shook her head weakly, tears spilling down her temples. Candace snorted. Always with the tears. You play the victim so well. Lydia held up a stack of papers. These are simple, she continued calmly. You sign, and this can end quickly. You refuse. She tilted her head, considering, well, we've already come this far. Aided. Mavis whimpered behind the gag, her body curling inward as much as the restraints allowed. Her mind splintered. She was 12 again, standing barefoot in the Whitmore kitchen, holding a mixing bowl too big for her arms. She was 17, scrubbing red wine from carpet, while laughter echoed above her. She was 21, standing in a sunlit apartment, keys trembling in her palm. Home. The word hurt more than the ropes. Lydia's expression hardened. Candace. Candace stepped forward. The first blow came without warning. An open-handed slap across Mavis's face snapped her head to the side, pain exploding behind her eyes. She cried out, a muffled sound swallowed by the gag. Stop it! Olivia muttered from the doorway, her voice uncertain. She looks like she needs to learn. Lydia cut in sharply. Candace grabbed Mavis by the hair, yanking her head back. You think you're special, she hissed. You think because he loves you. You can take what's ours. Did. E can us. Mavis shook her head frantically, sobbing now, tears soaking into the concrete beneath her cheek. Lydia stood. Make it quick. I don't have all night. Candace's fist drove into Mavis's stomach. The air left her lungs in a silent scream. She retched, gag choking her as her body folded in on itself. Again and again, at some point, Olivia looked away. Mavis lost track of time. Pain blurred into pain, moments bleeding together until she no longer knew where one ended and another began. She felt hands holding her down. Heard voices, distorted, echoing like they were underwater. Smelled something burning. Then came the worst part. Candace lit a cigarette. Mavis's eyes went wide in terror, her body thrashing as much as the ropes allowed. Lydia watched impassively. Do it, Lydia said. The cigarette pressed against her skin. White-hot agony ripped through her, raw and consuming. Her scream tore from her throat. Strangled by the gag, her entire body arching against the restraints. She thrashed until her muscles cramped, until tears streamed unchecked down her face. Again, Lydia said calmly, and again, each burn carved into her not just flesh, but memory. Her mind tried to escape, retreating inward, but the pain dragged her back, relentless. This isn't happening, she told herself desperately. I'm not here. I'm not here, but she was. When it was over, she lay shaking on the floor, body racked with sobs she couldn't control. Her chest burned with every breath. Her skin throbbed, each heartbeat a reminder. Lydia crouched beside her once more, placing the papers on the floor within sight. Sign, she said softly. And this all stops. Mavis stared at the papers through tears, her vision blurred. Her hand shook violently when Candace shoved a pen into her fingers. She didn't sign. Even then, broken, bleeding, barely conscious, something stubborn remained. A thin, unyielding thread tied to a man who called her baby girl, to a woman who taught her how to bake pies, to a belief that she mattered. Mavis let the pen fall. Lydia's eyes went cold. Lock her in, she said. They dragged her to a corner of the basement, dumped her onto a thin blanket, and left her with a bottle of water like an afterthought. The door slammed shut. Darkness rushed in. Silence. Mavis lay there, shaking, staring at nothing. Her body hurt in ways she couldn't name. Her mind fractured, slipping in and out of awareness. Sometimes she cried. Sometimes she didn't feel anything at all. Hours passed, or days. She couldn't tell. At some point, exhaustion pulled her under, and when she woke again, she understood one terrible truth with absolute clarity. No one was coming. Not yet. Mavis escaped 3 nights later. She didn't remember deciding to do it. There was no dramatic moment of courage, no clear plan, only instinct, raw and desperate, born from the quiet understanding that if she stayed, she would die. The basement window was small, barely wider than her shoulders. Its latch rusted and loose. She noticed it when Olivia came down once with a bottle of water and a slice of bread, avoiding eye contact as if guilt might be contagious. When the door shut again, Mavis lay still, counting her breaths, listening. That was when she tested the latch. It gave just enough. She waited until the house above fell silent. No footsteps, no voices, just the low hum of the refrigerator somewhere far away, and the distant bark of a dog. Getting to the window hurt. Every movement sent lightning through her ribs. Her wrists were swollen, her skin blistered and raw where the burns had begun to crust over. When she pushed herself upright, her vision swam, black dots dancing at the edges. She bit down on her sleeve to keep from crying out. The window scraped skin from her shoulders as she squeezed through. Blood smeared the concrete sill. For a moment she was stuck, breath trapped, panic roaring in her ears, but then gravity pulled her free, and she dropped hard onto damp earth outside. The impact knocked the air from her lungs. She lay there gasping, staring up at the night sky, stars blurred by tears. She was barefoot, wearing only a thin shirt and pajama pants. The air was cold enough to cut, but she was outside. She forced herself up and ran. She didn't know where she was going. She ran because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant remembering. She ran past manicured lawns and tall fences, past houses with porch lights glowing warm and indifferent. She knocked on one door, then another, her fists weak against polished wood. No one answered. A car slowed as she reached the main road. Hope flared. She stepped into the light, waving her arms. The car sped up. She kept walking. By dawn, her feet were shredded, blood streaking the pavement behind her. Her ribs screamed with every step. When she reached a gas station, she collapsed beside the building and used the payphone with shaking hands. The police came. The officer was young, tired, his hand resting casually near his belt. He listened with narrowed eyes as she tried to explain, words tumbling over each other, tangled and frantic. He ran her name, then his expression changed. "There's a report here," he said slowly. "Filed by your stepmother. Says you assaulted her, stole money. There's a restraining order." Mavis stared at him, stunned. "No. That's not. She did this to me. Please. Look at me." He glanced at her burns, her bruises, then back at the screen in his car. His shoulders stiffened. "Family dispute," he muttered. "Best thing you can do is stay away." "Please," she whispered. "I can't go back." He sighed. "Already done. I don't want to see you again. Next time, I'll have to arrest you." And just like that, he drove away. That was the moment something inside her broke, not loudly, not all at once, but quietly, like a bone cracking under too much weight. She walked until her legs gave out. Her first night on the street was behind a closed restaurant, curled beside a dumpster that smelled of grease and rot. She cried until there were no tears left, then lay staring at the sky, wondering how a life could disappear so completely. The streets taught her fast. Which alleys were safe enough to sleep in, which shelters had waiting lists longer than hope, which men smiled too much, which women shared when they could. She learned to make herself invisible. She learned not to ask too often. The first time she begged for food, she stood outside a deli, hands clasped, voice barely audible. "Excuse me, sir. Could you spare anything?" The man didn't even look at her. "Get a job," he snapped. A woman spat near her feet. Disgusting. One afternoon, hunger gnawing at her insides, she stood near a food truck and asked quietly if there were leftovers. The owner cursed at her, called her lazy, shoved her hard enough that she stumbled backward. She fell into a trash bin. Laughter followed. That night, 3 boys cornered her behind a convenience store. They shoved her, mocked her burns, called her names she'd heard her whole life but hoped she'd escaped. One pushed her hard. She hit the dumpster again, metal ringing in her ears, and then nothing. When she woke, it was morning, and Jerome was watching from across the alley. He had been tracking tips for weeks. Homeless outreach workers, soup kitchens, anyone who mentioned a young black woman who spoke like she'd been educated, who carried herself with quiet dignity, even when broken. "She's behind the grocery store on Lamar," someone had finally said. "Been there a while. Keeps to herself. Scars all over." Jerome had waited, needed certainty. Now, watching her stir, watching the way she flinched at every sound, he knew. Mavis didn't know any of that yet. She only knew the street didn't care. It didn't care who you were, or who you'd been, or what had been taken from you. It only cared whether you survived. So she did, one day at a time. Mavis cleaned herself in gas station bathrooms when she could. Cold water splashed over her face. Paper towels pressed gently against burns that never quite stopped aching. She learned how to stand so the security cameras wouldn't catch her for too long, how to look busy without looking suspicious. She learned which clerks would ignore her if she kept her eyes down and which ones would call the police the moment she lingered. By the second week, hunger became a constant, dull presence, not sharp anymore, just there, like the pain in her ribs, like the buzzing in her head when memories tried to claw their way back. She still believed, foolishly, that if she could just get to Harold, everything would stop. On a Wednesday morning, she walked the 3 miles to Whitmore Medical Center. She chose the day carefully, early enough that the lobby wouldn't be crowded. She wore the cleanest clothes. She had an oversized sweatshirt someone had donated, jeans with a split seam she'd stitched together with dental floss. She practiced what she would say the whole way there. "I need help. I'm not safe. Please tell him I'm here." The building loomed white and pristine against the blue Texas sky. Glass and steel, power and order. She hesitated at the revolving doors. watching doctors stride past in pressed coats, nurses laughing softly as they checked their phones. She stepped inside. The cool air hit her skin like a shock. The marble floors reflected her distorted image. Thin, hunched, out of place. She approached the security desk slowly. "Excuse me," she said quietly. "I need to see Mr. Whitmore." The guard barely looked up. "Do you have an appointment?" "No," she said. "But he knows me. My name is Mavis Green." That made him look. His eyes swept over her from her unwashed hair to her worn shoes and hardened. "Ma'am, Mr. Whitmore doesn't take walk-ins." "I'm not a walk-in," she said, panic creeping into her voice. "Please. I worked for him. I lived with him. He's my—" "Ma'am," he interrupted, already annoyed. "If you don't have an appointment, you need to leave." She swallowed. "Could you call his office?" "Just tell them." "Move along," the guard snapped. "You're making people uncomfortable." Her chest tightened. She glanced around, aware of eyes on her now. A woman in scrubs frowned. A man pulled his briefcase closer. "I'm not dangerous," Mavis whispered. "I just need—" The guard stood. "Last warning." She backed away slowly. Heart pounding. Shame flooding her veins. As she turned, she caught her reflection again in the glass doors. This time, she didn't recognize the girl staring back. Outside, the sun felt too bright, too loud. She sat on the steps for a moment, head in her hands, trying to breathe through the spiral threatening to drag her under. Her thoughts fractured, memories intruding without permission. Lydia's calm voice, Candace's laughter, the heat of the cigarette. Her body shook. She stood up abruptly and walked. Her next stop was Houston College. She told herself it made sense. If she could talk to someone there, an advisor, a professor, they would help her reach Harold. They had known her, respected her. She had been a top student, a scholarship recipient. She clung to that hope like a lifeline. The campus gates were open. Students milled about, backpacks slung over shoulders, laughing, complaining about exams. She felt invisible among them, like a ghost walking through someone else's life. She went straight to the administration building. "I'm here to see my advisor," she told the woman at the front desk. "Dr. Keating." The woman typed something into her computer, frowning slightly. "Name?" "Mavis Green." Her fingers paused. "I'm sorry," the woman said slowly. "You're not listed as a current student." Mavis's stomach dropped. "That's not possible. I was enrolled last semester." The woman clicked again. "It says here you withdrew." "I didn't," Mavis said. "I would never." "There's a form on file," the woman continued, her tone cooling. "Signed by your guardian. Effective immediately." "My guardian?" Mavis repeated faintly. "Yes, Mrs. Whitmore." The world tilted. "That's a mistake," Mavis said desperately. "She doesn't have the right." "I'm sorry," the woman said, already looking past her. "There's nothing I can do." Mavis stood there for a long moment, unable to move. Her scholarship, her classes, her future, gone. She stumbled outside and sat on a bench, pressing her palms to her eyes until spots danced behind them. A sob escaped her before she could stop it. She hunched forward, trying to make herself smaller, quieter, invisible again. That was when the panic hit full force. Her chest tightened. Her breath came in short, shallow gasps. Her hands trembled violently. The sounds around her blurred, stretching and warping until they felt far away. "I'm back there," her mind insisted. "I'm still there." She curled in on herself, rocking slightly, counting her breaths like the therapist at the shelter once taught her. In for 4, hold, out for 6. It barely helped. By the time she reached the bank later that afternoon, she was exhausted beyond words. "I just need to check my balance," she told the teller, voice barely steady. The teller's smile faltered as she looked at the screen. "Your account is frozen." "What?" Mavis whispered. "There's a report of suspicious activity," the teller said carefully. "You'll need to contact your account manager." "Please," Mavis said, tears welling. "I need that money. That's all I have." The teller glanced at the growing line behind her. "I'm sorry." She walked out of the bank numb. No school, no money, no home, no protection. By nightfall, She found herself back behind the grocery store on Lamar, curling up near the dumpster that offered at least some shelter from the wind. Her body ached. Her mind was foggy. Every hope she'd carried with her onto the streets had been stripped away, one by one. She stared up at the sliver of sky visible between buildings and whispered, "Granddaddy." I tried. Redine. She didn't know that. Miles away, Jerome Boone was reviewing outreach logs, circling a name written in careful block letters by a volunteer. M. Green. Early 20s, educated, scars. And for the first time in a long while, the night shifted. Jerome Boone trusted patterns more than people. People lied. Patterns didn't. For 3 weeks, he had been chasing fragments, half-remembered descriptions from outreach workers, scribbled notes from shelter logs, a single recurring detail that refused to leave him alone. Educated voice, polite, scars. He sat in his car outside a community center on Lamar Street. Engine off. Coffee gone cold in the cup holder. The building was unremarkable, peeling paint, flickering fluorescent lights, but it was the kind of place truth passed through quietly. Soup kitchens, mobile clinics, people who saw what the rest of the city refused to look at. Jerome adjusted his jacket and stepped out. Inside, the air smelled of instant coffee and disinfectant. A handful of folding tables were set up near the back wall. Volunteers moved with practiced efficiency, handing out sandwiches and bottled water. A woman in her late 40s stood near the sign-in clipboard, her hair pulled back tight, reading glasses perched on her nose. "Morning," Jerome said, flashing a gentle smile. "Name's Jerome. I'm looking for someone." The woman looked him over, tall, well-dressed, not one of theirs. Suspicion flickered briefly before settling into guarded curiosity. "Everyone's looking for someone," she said. "Who is it?" "A young woman," Jerome replied. Early 20s. Black. Goes by M. Very polite. Talks like she's been to college. The woman stilled. Her eyes dropped to the clipboard. "How long ago?" she asked carefully. Jerome's pulse quickened. "Couple of years, but she's been around here recently." The woman exhaled slowly. "Yeah, I know who you mean." Jerome leaned in, keeping his voice low. "Is she here?" "No," the woman said. "Not today." "Is she safe?" The woman hesitated. That was answer enough. "She sleeps behind the grocery store down the block," she said finally. "Or she did. We haven't seen her since yesterday morning." Jerome nodded. "Does she talk much?" "Only when she has to," the woman replied. "Always says thank you. Always asks if there's anything she can do to help, even when she can barely stand." "Any family?" The woman snorted softly. "She once told me she used to bake pies in a mansion. Lemon ones." Said it like she was talking about another life. Jerome felt something settle into place. "Did she ever mention a name?" he asked. The woman studied him for a moment. "Why do you care?" "Because someone's been looking for her," Jerome said simply. "And they never stopped." The woman closed the clipboard. "Her name's Mavis. I don't know her last name. She's been through hell." Jerome thanked her and stepped back outside. The alley behind the grocery store was quiet. Too quiet. No movement. No familiar signs of life. The cardboard she usually slept on was still there, flattened, damp from last night's rain. Jerome crouched, touching the edge of it, still warm. "She was here," he muttered. A store employee leaned against the loading dock, smoking. "You looking for the girl?" the man asked casually. Jerome straightened. "You seen her?" "Yesterday," the man said. "Some kids were messing with her. Pushed her around. She fell hard." Jerome's jaw tightened. "Did anyone help?" The man shrugged. "She was breathing. That's about as far as people go these days." "Where did she go?" The man flicked his cigarette away. "Didn't see. She passed out. When I came back from my break, she was gone." Jerome stepped back, scanning the alley. That was when he saw the scuff marks. The faint drag lines near the dumpster. The indentation in the trash bags where someone small and light had been lying. And then tire marks. Fresh. Not delivery trucks. Too narrow. An SUV. Jerome pulled out his phone and called Harold. "I found her," he said without preamble. Silence crackled on the other end. "Alive?" Harold asked. "Was," Jerome said carefully. I think someone took her. Who? Harold demanded. Jerome's eyes followed the tire marks to the street. That's what I'm about to find out. Harold Whitmore sat in his study, the city lights of Houston glowing faintly beyond the windows. He hadn't slept. Couldn't. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Mavis as a child standing on a stool in the kitchen, flour dusting her nose. Then he saw her behind the dumpster, lifting her shirt in silence. His phone rang. He answered immediately. Talk to me, he said. She was behind a grocery store on Lamar, Jerome reported. Homeless. Injured. Someone assaulted her yesterday. Possibly abducted. Harold stood so fast his chair tipped over. I want names, he said coldly. I want faces. I want to know who touched her. I'm pulling street cams now, Jerome replied. City feeds. Private buildings. It'll take time. You have it. There was a pause. She's tougher than she looks, Jerome added quietly. She's survived this long. Harold closed his eyes, gripping the edge of the desk. I should have protected her, he said. I should have made it impossible for anyone to ever lay a hand on her. You didn't know, Jerome said. But now you do. The line went dead. Outside, the city carried on traffic lights blinking, people heading home to warm dinners and familiar voices. Somewhere in that vast sprawl, Mavis was alone again, but not unseen. Not anymore. Mavis woke to the steady rhythm of a monitor and the unfamiliar weight of clean sheets. For a moment, panic surged through her, sharp and immediate. Her body tensed, breath hitching as her eyes flew open, scanning for concrete walls, bare bulbs, ropes. Her heart pounded so hard it hurt, every muscle bracing for pain that didn't come. White. Everything was white. Ceiling tiles. Curtains. The quiet hum of machines. The air smelled sterile, not damp or rotten. Her hands were free. Bandaged, but free. She swallowed, her throat dry. No. No. No, she whispered, her voice hoarse. She tried to sit up, but pain flared along her ribs, forcing a soft cry from her lips. Immediately, a chair scraped. Mavis. The voice cut through the fog like a hand reaching into dark water. She turned her head slowly. Harold sat beside the bed, his suit jacket draped over the back of the chair, tie loosened, eyes rimmed red with exhaustion. He looked older than she remembered, smaller, somehow. But when he leaned forward, taking her hand in both of his, the warmth was unmistakable. It's okay, he said gently. You're safe. You're in the hospital. Whitmore Medical Center. Her mind struggled to catch up. Hospital meant help. Help meant truth. Truth meant remembering. Tears welled instantly. I tried, she whispered. I tried to come back. I went to the building. They wouldn't let me in. I went to school. They said I quit. I didn't quit. And, I know, Harold said softly. I know, baby girl. Her fingers tightened weakly around his. I thought you didn't want me anymore. The words broke something in him. He bowed his head, pressing her hand to his forehead. Never, he said, voice rough. Not for 1 second. They lied to you. They lied to me. And I believed them longer than I should have. She shook her head, winced. It's my fault. I should have told you. I should have screamed louder. No, he said firmly. You survived. That's what matters. She closed her eyes, exhaustion pulling at her like gravity. Images flickered behind her lids, dumpsters, cigarette burns. Lydia's calm voice. The officer turning away. Her breathing quickened. Harold noticed immediately. Hey, look at me. She did. You're here, he said. That part is over. You don't have to be strong right now. A nurse entered quietly, checking vitals, adjusting the IV. She spoke softly, respectfully, explaining each movement before touching Mavis. It mattered more than anyone realized. Dr. Reyes followed soon after. We've run a full evaluation, she said, addressing Harold but keeping her tone gentle enough for Mavis to hear. She's malnourished, dehydrated, and has multiple healed and healing injuries consistent with prolonged abuse. Some ribs healed improperly. We'll need surgery later, but not immediately. Mavis stared at the ceiling, numb. And psychologically, Dr. Reyes continued, she's showing clear signs of complex PTSD, night terrors, dissociation, panic responses. We have a trauma specialist ready when she's able. Harold nodded. Do whatever she needs. Dr. Reyes hesitated briefly. There's something else. She handed Harold a thin folder. Photographic documentation, she said quietly. With her consent, for legal purposes, Mavis turned her head toward him. Fear flickered across her face. He squeezed her hand. We won't do anything you don't want, he said. But this matters. It protects you. She swallowed. After a long moment, she nodded once. Okay. Dr. Reyes left them alone. Silence settled between them. Heavy, but not hostile. Outside the window, the city moved cars, people, life continuing as if nothing had happened. Jerome found you, Harold said after a while. He never stopped looking either. She frowned faintly. The man, near the alley? Yes. Her lips trembled. I thought I was invisible. Harold's jaw tightened. You were hidden. There's a difference. She turned her face toward him again, eyes glassy. They burned me because I wouldn't sign. They said I wasn't family, that I was just the help. His grip tightened. They were wrong. She hesitated, then asked the question she'd been afraid to voice since waking. Are they here? No, he said. And they won't be. Her shoulders sagged with relief so deep it looked like pain. That night, Mavis drifted in and out of sleep. Each time she startled awake, Harold was still there. Sometimes sitting, sometimes standing by the window. Once, she heard him quietly speaking into his phone, voice low and dangerous. I want everything, he said. Accounts, properties, calls. I don't care how long it takes. In the early hours of morning, when the nightmares came, she cried out. He was at her side instantly. Shh, he murmured, placing a steady hand over hers. You're here. I've got you. She clung to his sleeve like a child, breath ragged. Don't leave. I'm not going anywhere. For the first time in years, she believed it. By dawn, Jerome arrived with a laptop and a look that told Harold everything before he spoke. We've got movement, Jerome said quietly. Bank transfers, property sales, shell companies. It's ugly. Harold stood, his face carved from stone. Good. Mavis watched from the bed, listening to fragments she didn't fully understand. Evidence, fraud, forgery, restraining orders filed in her absence. They tried to erase you, Jerome said gently, meeting her eyes. But they left a trail. She felt something unfamiliar stir beneath the exhaustion and fear. Not hope, not yet, but the possibility of justice. Harold turned back to her. You rest, he said. Let me carry this part. She nodded, eyes heavy. As sleep claimed her again, one thought drifted through her mind, fragile but real. She wasn't alone anymore. Mavis was discharged 3 days later, under tight security and a strict recovery plan. Her body still ached in places she didn't want to name, and her mind flinched at shadows, sudden sounds, even the sterile beep of a hospital monitor. But she could walk, she could eat without gagging, she could sleep, sometimes, for more than an hour at a time, and she wasn't alone. Harold took her not to his penthouse, but to the family ranch house 2 hours outside Houston, a sprawling, single-level home nestled behind wrought iron gates and dense oaks. There were no marble floors here, no polished silver, no glass elevators, just wooden beams, creaky porches, and the scent of cedar and baked cornbread lingering in the air. Mavis stepped through the front door slowly, her hand brushing the worn doorframe as if testing if it were real. It's yours as long as you need, Harold said. Longer, if you want. She turned to him, eyes searching. Why didn't you ever bring me here before? His expression softened. It was my father's house, and a part of me wanted to keep it separate. Sacred. Is it still? Not anymore. Jerome met them there with a laptop and stacks of folders that barely fit in the worn leather satchel slung over his shoulder. We've got enough to bury them, he said, as he set everything down on the dining table. Lydia, Candace, even Olivia, financial fraud, abuse of power. A lawyer signed off on false documents to remove Mavis from school. Bank statements show funds diverted from the family trust. Mavis sank into a chair, careful not to lean on her left side. "I don't want to be a headline," she said softly. "You won't be," Harold said firmly. "This isn't about public spectacle. It's about restoring what was taken." Jerome opened a file and pushed it toward her. "This is the deed to the apartment you were gifted. Lydia filed a false sale. We're already in motion to reverse the title transfer. And these," he held up several more forms, "are statements from 3 outreach workers who saw your injuries. They'll testify." Mavis hesitated. "And if I say I just want them to disappear?" Jerome looked to Harold. Harold nodded. "Then that's what happens. AMR. But deep down, Mavis knew silence was how they had all survived for so long. Silence had protected them, wrapped them in lies. "I want justice," she said, voice stronger than she expected. "Not just for me. For the girl who sleeps behind the grocery store tonight. For every kid who's told they don't belong." Jerome smiled faintly. "Then we start here. It not is too." The legal team Harold assembled was surgical 3 attorneys, 2 investigators, and a retired federal prosecutor who came out of semi-retirement after hearing Mavis's story. They worked quietly, fast, and without compromise. While they built the case, Mavis rebuilt herself. Some mornings, she sat on the porch with tea, letting the sun warm her skin. Others, she wandered barefoot through the pasture, arms wrapped around herself, grounding in the rhythm of the wind through the tall grass. She baked again lemon pies like she used to for Harold's birthday, sweet and tart and perfectly golden. Therapy sessions came twice a week. At first, she hated them. She didn't want to dig into memories that already haunted her dreams. But Dr. Chambers, a black woman in her 50s with a calm voice and fierce compassion, didn't push. She let Mavis set the pace. "The world tried to write you out of your own story," Dr. Chambers said once. "But you're holding the pen now." INAG. Slowly, the nightmares lessened. One day, Mavis stood in front of the mirror and touched the scars on her abdomen. She didn't look away. Didn't flinch. She lived. 2 weeks later, Jerome walked in with a file marked, "Olivia." "Her conscience caught up with her," he said. "She's cooperating." Mavis blinked. "She is? She gave us everything. Emails, text messages, even footage from the Whitmore home security system that Lydia thought she had erased." Harold let out a low whistle. "That's the smoking gun." Jerome nodded. "Lydia's done." "And Candace?" Mavis asked, a shadow passing through her expression. Jerome's voice turned colder. "She left the country. But we'll get her. We've already flagged her at customs and frozen her accounts." Mavis sat back, quiet. Harold reached across the table, covering her hand. "We'll make sure she never hurts anyone again." She didn't speak for a long time. Then, "I don't want revenge. I want consequences. You'll have them." 89. The court date was set for early spring. Until then, Mavis prepared herself not with press conferences or speeches, but with small rituals that reminded her she was real. She picked wildflowers from the ranch, wrote letters to the girl she'd been, read books that used to lull her to sleep as a child. One night, she sat on the porch swing under a sky full of stars. Harold joined her, 2 mugs of cocoa in hand. "I thought I lost you," he said quietly. "You did," she replied, "but I found me again." He smiled, pride softening the lines of his face. She sipped her cocoa. "Do you think people can really change?" Harold considered that. "I think some people don't want to. And some people fight like hell to become who they were meant to be." She looked out at the stars. "I used to think I was just the help." "You were never just anything," he said. "You were always more." For the first time in years, Mavis believed him. And as the wind shifted gently through the trees, she whispered into the night, not in fear, but with resolve. "I'm coming back." The courthouse smelled like waxed floors and stale paper. It was the kind of building where thousands of decisions had been made that changed lives forever, some just, some shamefully not. Mavis sat in a private waiting room just off the main hall, dressed simply in a navy blue blouse and black slacks. Her hair was braided back, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She had refused any glamour or publicity, opting instead for dignity, truth and presence. I don't want them to say I came here to look like something I'm not, she'd told Dr. Chambers. I'm not here to perform pain. Harold sat beside her, looking more like a grandfather than a billionaire this morning, jacket on, tie slightly askew, his eyes tired from sleepless nights. He had barely left her side since the hospital. Jerome entered quietly, his face unreadable. They're here, he said. All of them? Harold asked. Jerome nodded. Lydia, Candace, Olivia too. The lawyers tried to keep her out of the courtroom, citing mental stress, but the judge denied the request. She's on the list to testify. Mavis's fingers tightened around the small silver ring she wore her mother's. One of the few things Lydia hadn't sold or destroyed. Do I have to look at them? She asked. You don't have to do anything you don't want, Harold said. But I think you're strong enough to. I'm not here for them, Mavis murmured. I'm here for me. She stood slowly, legs steady, and walked into the courtroom. The trial had been expedited, thanks to overwhelming evidence and public pressure after an anonymous leak of the Whitmore House abuse footage had surfaced online. The press couldn't identify Mavis by name. Court orders had sealed her identity, but the footage, though grainy, had been enough to shake the internet. She's someone's daughter. She's not invisible anymore. I hope she finds peace. But the courtroom was quiet, clinical. A world of procedure and legal jargon, of truth told through evidence and testimony. Mavis sat on the witness stand as the prosecutor led her gently through her testimony. She told them about the betrayal, about being locked away, about the burns, the false accusations, the forged documents that had erased her from school, from her own bank account, from her place in Harold's life. But she didn't cry. Not here. Instead, her voice was steady, soft, but unwavering. I wasn't a threat to them, she said. I was just a reminder that no matter how much money they had, they couldn't stop time. Couldn't stop someone like me from becoming more than what they told me I was. Oh, the defense tried to rattle her. A young attorney, slick-haired, expensive suit, asked pointedly, if the Whitmores were so abusive, why didn't you go to the police sooner? Mavis looked at him evenly. I did. They didn't believe me. And yet now, here you are with the backing of a billionaire. I'm here, Mavis said, because I survived. Gasps echoed through the gallery. Even the judge paused for a moment. The young attorney flinched, then quickly flipped to another page. No more questions. Lydia took the stand next. Mavis watched from the gallery as the woman who had once called her girl like it was a curse now wore pearls and a look of practiced innocence. She was always troubled, Lydia claimed. We tried to help her, of course, but she refused to be grateful. She ran off, lied about everything. The footage said otherwise. So did the signed documents, the bank trails, the forensic evidence of burns that matched the cigar brands Harold had never smoked. Candace was next. She wore a black suit, hair tied back, sunglasses hiding most of her expression. She pled the fifth on nearly every question, but Olivia, fragile, guilt-racked Olivia, was different. She broke on the stand. I didn't know how bad it was, she said through tears. I saw the bruises. I knew they were lying about the apartment. I didn't say anything because, if I spoke up, it meant admitting I let it happen. Mavis didn't hate her. She didn't pity her either. She simply watched her unravel, quietly, with no satisfaction. Justice wasn't about revenge. It was about acknowledgement. And when Olivia turned to face her and whispered, I'm sorry, Mavis gave the smallest of nods. Not forgiveness, but truth shared. And that was enough. At the end of the day, the verdict was clear. The courtroom held its breath as the judge read the decision. On the counts of fraud, abuse, and intentional infliction of emotional distress, we find the defendants guilty. Lydia collapsed into her chair. Candace swore under her breath. Olivia wept openly. Mavis stood, heart steady. Outside, the media waited, cameras aimed, microphones ready. But Harold walked ahead of her, one hand raised. No statements, he said. Not today. Mavis stepped into the sunlight, blinking. The world hadn't changed, but she had. That night, back at the ranch, Harold lit a small fire in the hearth. Jerome cooked stew. Mavis stood on the porch, looking out over the wide Texas fields that seemed to stretch forever. She breathed deep. The stars above her didn't care about wealth or power or lies. They only existed to shine. "I'm ready," she whispered. To what? She didn't know yet, but she was ready. The news spread faster than Harold expected. By morning, every major outlet had headlines blazing across their front pages. Heiress abused and erased by family. Court delivers stunning verdict. Whitmore Maid turns out to be legal beneficiary. Mavis Green, the girl who came back. Harold didn't authorize any statements, but the truth had a momentum of its own. Inside the ranch house, though, the world moved more slowly. Mavis sat at the kitchen table, her fingers wrapped around a ceramic mug that smelled faintly of cinnamon and memory. The court ruling had done more than expose the abuse. It had reinstated Harold's original will, which Lydia had tried to suppress and alter. That will named Mavis not as staff, not even as a dependent, but as a full legal heir. It was an old document, signed when she was only 17, before she ever knew how cruel people could be when power shifted away from them. Harold had never withdrawn it. She had never known it existed. "They called me a maid," Mavis whispered, staring into the steam rising from her tea. "A servant. A nuisance." Jerome sat across from her, sliding a thick folder toward her. "They called you that because they couldn't call you what you were." It terrified them. Harold entered quietly, holding a letter in one hand, his face unreadable. "I need to talk to you," he said to Mavis. She stood and followed him to the study, her pulse quickening. Was there more? The study was dim, the wood-paneled walls lined with old books, photographs, and one framed photo of her younger self standing next to Harold on the porch, holding a pie. She remembered that day. She'd burned the crust and cried. He ate 2 slices anyway. Harold placed the letter on the desk. "It's from my lawyer. A final confirmation. You are, officially and legally, the primary heir to the Whitmore estate, the properties, the foundation, everything." Mavis said nothing. "I tried to do this years ago," he said, stepping closer. "Because I knew. You weren't just some girl Lydia tolerated. You were family. You are family." Mavis's lips trembled. "But I'm not your blood." Harold gave a soft laugh, weathered and honest. "Mavis, blood doesn't raise a child. It doesn't bandage scraped knees, or sing lullabies, or make birthday cakes from scratch when no one else remembers. You've always been mine. The world's just catching up." Her eyes welled up with quiet, exhausted tears. "Do you want this?" Harold asked gently. "The name. The legacy. You don't have to take it." She looked down at the ring on her hand, her mother's, and then back at the man who had fought for her when she had nothing left. "I don't want their world," she said. "But I want to build something better." A slow smile broke across his face. "Then let's do it." With that afternoon, Mavis walked through the back fields of the ranch, barefoot, breeze in her hair. For the first time, she wasn't hiding. She was thinking. Everything she had ever known was changing. Wealth, title, attention, but all of that meant nothing if she couldn't find meaning in it. She remembered the girls at the shelter, the ones too scared to speak, the ones with burns and bruises and eyes that didn't shine anymore. She remembered being one of them. What if she could make something for them? A home, a place with locks that weren't there to keep them inside. By evening, she had her answer. When she returned to the house, she sat with Harold and Jerome on the porch and laid out her vision. "I want to turn the South property into a sanctuary," she said. "Not a charity. A place of dignity. For girls like me. Women like my mother." Jerome raised an eyebrow. "A shelter? A restoration?" Mavis corrected. "A place where they don't just survive, they reclaim. Their education, their voice, their futures." Harold nodded slowly. "We can fund it through the foundation." Mavis shook her head. "I want to fund it through me." He stared at her. "I want them to know it wasn't handed down. I gave it. Because I understand." Silence fell between them. Then Harold smiled, tears in his eyes. "Your granddaddy would have been proud." "I hope so." Jerome leaned back. "You know, you've got a press conference next week." "I'm not interested in photo ops," Mavis said. "Then speak your truth," he said. "Let the world see who they tried to erase." She considered it. "Only if I get to say it my way." That weekend, Mavis stood before a room full of journalists. The cameras flashed, the murmurs buzzed, and then she spoke. "My name is Mavis Green. I was raised in a house that called me help, but never heard me cry. I was educated in halls that praised my grades but ignored my scars. I was a girl who almost disappeared. But I'm here. I survived. And I'm no longer invisible." She didn't read from a script. She didn't smile for the cameras. "I'm not telling this story for pity. I'm telling it so the next girl doesn't have to live it. So the next child isn't buried under someone else's shame. I am not the help. I am the legacy." And with that, she stepped down. The applause started slowly, one journalist, then another, until the whole room rose to their feet. Outside, the headlines waited again, but this time, they would carry her name for the right reason. Mavis Green, the heir no one saw coming. 6 months passed. The leaves had turned and fallen, the air grown crisp and dry across the Whitmore estate. The ranch remained quiet, but beneath the stillness was movement, a quiet storm of transformation. Every corner of the property, once symbols of isolation and privilege, was slowly becoming something new. The south wing, once a series of unused guest houses, had been gutted and rebuilt from the inside out. Now it was called the Haven. There were no marble staircases, no chandeliers. Instead, it had soft couches, warm light, stocked bookshelves, and a kitchen that smelled of cinnamon and gingerbread. There were no locks on the bedroom doors, only gentle reminders on each one. "You are safe here." Mavis stood just inside the main hall, her hand pressed to the newly painted wall, watching as a young girl, maybe 13, carefully unpacked a small duffel bag into a drawer. The girl kept glancing over her shoulder like someone might take it away. "She can keep that bag," Mavis said gently. The girl nodded without looking up. Her name was Shanice. Her file read like Mavis's own past foster homes, silence, and a world that had never bothered to ask who she really was. Mavis left her to settle in and stepped out onto the porch, exhaling into the cool evening. Jerome approached from the drive, clipboard in hand, suit jacket slung over his shoulder. "She's number 20, he said, nodding back toward the house. "That's 20 girls since the launch. I remember when I was just one," Mavis murmured. Jerome handed her the clipboard. "Donation reports. We've had over 100 offers to partner, 2 national grants, and a small article in The Atlantic." "I told you I didn't want press," she reminded him. "I didn't give it," he said with a wink. "A girl from one of the first waves wrote it herself. Said you saved her life. Never even used your name. Just called you the woman who didn't flinch when I told her the truth." Mavis smiled faintly. Behind them, Harold was helping an older teen fix a broken window latch. He didn't mind the hammer in his hand. If anything, it made him feel more useful than any boardroom ever had. Later that evening, as the sun began to dip and the porch lamps blinked on, Mavis sat at the long wooden table where the girls gathered each night. Shanice took a seat beside her with quiet reverence, like sitting next to Mavis meant something sacred. "You eat cornbread?" Mavis asked, handing her a plate. Shanice nodded, barely a whisper. "I used to." Mavis smiled. "Then you do again." One by one, the girls filled the table. Each one a story, each one a scar. None of them were required to talk about it, not unless they wanted to. Here, their silence was honored. Their presence was enough. Halfway through the meal, Shanice turned to Mavis. "My sister says rich people only help when the cameras are rolling," she said. Mavis looked her in the eye. "Then tell your sister she hasn't met the right rich people." The room burst into soft laughter, but the truth hung in the air like a promise. That night, Harold and Mavis stood outside under a sky littered with stars. "You've done something rare," he said. "You turned pain into purpose." She didn't answer at first. Instead, she walked to the old rocking chair her mother used to sit in when she worked for the Whitmores, the same one Mavis used to sneak into after long baking days. She sat down slowly, running her fingers over the worn armrest. "They said I was the help," she said finally. "And I was." Then she looked at him, voice calm and fierce. "But now I help build futures, and there's no shame in that." Harold nodded, eyes shining. "I want to change the name," she said after a long pause. "Of the house? Of the estate?" He raised a brow. "It's not about the Whitmores anymore," she said. "This place. It's not theirs. Not really. I tense. What do you want to call it? She turned to the fields, the trees, the dark sky that once felt like a ceiling and now felt like a doorway. Juniper House, she said, for what survives through hard winters. Harold said nothing for a moment. Then he whispered, perfect. In the weeks that followed, Juniper House became more than a refuge. It became a movement. Volunteers came. Mentors, therapists, former social workers, lawyers who wanted to help girls expunge charges forced on them when they were just trying to survive. Women who had escaped violence but hadn't escaped shame. Every Sunday evening, Mavis hosted something called The Circle. No structure, no speeches, just a candlelit room where the girls could speak or not, and remember that their voices mattered. One night, a girl named Bria, who hadn't spoken in 3 months, finally raised her hand. I had a mom who said my bruises were my fault, she said, voice trembling. And I still miss her sometimes. No one gasped. No one flinched. Mavis reached across the circle, holding out her hand. I still miss someone who let it happen too, she said. You don't have to hate them to heal. Bria took her hand and wept for the first time. Outside the circle, Jerome watched through the glass. He didn't interrupt. Some rooms weren't for men to enter. That night, Mavis walked the grounds alone. The sky overhead whispered memories and promises all at once. She thought about Candace still overseas, stripped of power. About Lydia, serving time in a prison where no money could protect her. About Olivia, who sent postcards every month from her volunteer work in Guatemala, her penance. But mostly, she thought about her mother, the woman who cleaned floors with calloused hands and taught Mavis to read with the light from a closet bulb. I hope you see me now, Mavis whispered. The wind rustled gently through the junipers, and somewhere in her bones, she felt the answer. Winter came gently to Texas that year. A soft cold, the kind that didn't bite so much as it reminded you to slow down, to light fires, to bring out the blankets stitched by women long gone but never forgotten. At Juniper House, the halls were decorated with handmade garlands, cut paper snowflakes, and a crooked tree the girls had insisted on dragging in from the edge of the woods. It leaned slightly, but no one seemed to mind. Mavis stood back, watching the girls laugh as they looped popcorn strings and argued over which star belonged on top. The air was full of cinnamon and music and healing. But in the dining hall, one chair always sat empty. It had started by accident. The night after the court ruling, when Mavis hosted her first dinner as the legal heir of the Whitmore estate, one chair had been pulled out and never filled. They had saved it for someone late, someone maybe returning. No one spoke of it, but it stayed, unspoken, undisturbed. That chair had become sacred. It was for the ones still missing. The girls who hadn't made it out. The women who were never believed. The voices that were silenced before they ever got the chance to speak. And tonight, as holiday lights blinked gently outside the frosted windows, Mavis lit a candle beside it. For remembrance, for reverence, for truth. Harold entered quietly, dusting snow from his coat. His age showed more in winter, aching knees, slower steps, but his eyes were clear, and his hands still steady. "You're not sitting?" he asked gently. Mavis smiled. "No, this one's not for me." He looked at the empty chair and nodded. The girls gathered slowly, each one pausing by the chair, brushing its back or whispering something only they could hear. Then they took their seats, their places. Mavis stood at the head of the table. "I used to dream of silence," she said softly. Silence meant safety, meant no one yelling, meant no one hurting. A hush fell over the room. Even the youngest girl, barely 10, stopped twirling her fork. "But now I know," Mavis continued. "Silence can also be a cage. And tonight, I want us to fill this house with the sound of everything they told us to bury. Laughter, stories, music, joy." The girls leaned in, and soon, the room buzzed with life. Someone put on a song from the 80 Seconds, and two of the older teens started dancing, pulling others up from their chairs. One knocked over a cup of cider and apologized 3 times before Mavis smiled and said, "It's just a table. You're what matters." Jerome entered with 2 pies under each arm. "We're officially out of sugar," he announced, "and I regret nothing." Later that night, after the girls had gone to bed and the house was quieter, Mavis sat by the fire with Harold and Jerome. I want to expand, she said suddenly. Harold raised a brow. Juniper House? There are too many girls still out there. Too many towns with nothing but churches and liquor stores. I want to build another one. In Mississippi. Maybe one day. Detroit. Oakland. Wherever it's needed. Jerome leaned forward. You're serious? I've never been more. Harold smiled. Then we do it. They talked into the night budgets, timelines, potential locations. But somewhere in the middle of the planning, Mavis's gaze drifted back to that one empty chair. Do you ever wonder, she asked quietly, how many girls no one ever looked for? Jerome's face turned solemn. Every day, she nodded. I want to name the next house after them. What name? Harold asked. The Unfound. Is Rebordeds. A beat of silence. Then Jerome whispered, That's powerful. Mavis looked at him, her voice barely audible. So they're not forgotten. The next morning, the girls found a new note posted above the sacred chair. In honor of the unfound, the unheard, the unseen, you are loved, you are remembered, and we are still looking for you. That week, Mavis received a letter. It was handwritten, stamped from a small town in Louisiana. It read, I saw you on the news. I remember you from the kitchen on Dandelion Street. You let me sleep by the stove once when I ran away. I was 12. You told me I mattered. I didn't believe you then, but I do now. I'm safe. I got out. I just wanted you to know someone remembers you too. Tears slipped down her cheek as she folded the letter. She placed it in the center of the dining table, beside the chair. A reminder, sometimes, even the unfound find their way home. Spring returned to Texas with quiet grace, soft rains, sun-dappled mornings, the scent of wild honeysuckle drifting in from the fields. At Juniper House, the world blossomed right alongside the girls inside. Healing, like spring, wasn't sudden. It was slow, green, persistent. Mavis had learned to recognize the signs. Laughter in the hallway where there had once been silence. A plate licked clean by a girl who hadn't eaten a full meal in weeks. A hand raised in class. A door left open at night, not out of carelessness, but of trust. They were building something that lasted. But today was different. Today, they were carving it in stone. The sun was already high when Mavis walked the girls down the long gravel path toward the south lawn, where a modest brick building now stood. It had once been the old stables. Mavis had it gutted, reinforced, and rebuilt into something far more important than its original purpose. Inside were classrooms, therapy rooms, art spaces, and reading nooks. Every surface, from the walls to the ceilings, had been painted by the girls themselves. Words of power and survival, names of women they admired, dreams. At the entrance stood a white cloth, draped over a new plaque. Harold, wearing his best ranch suit and a smile too proud to hide, stood nearby with Jerome and Dr. Chambers. They were family now. Bound not by blood but by battle, by the fire they'd all come through. Mavis turned to the group. Some of the girls held flowers. One clutched a journal to her chest like armor. I know buildings don't change lives, Mavis said softly, addressing the crowd. People do. You do. She paused, letting that sink in. This building is a promise, a place to learn, to speak, to remember. And we're giving it a name today not just because it deserves one, but because so do you. With that, she pulled the cloth away. The crowd fell silent. The Leela Green Center for Restoration. A breath caught in Mavis's throat. The name felt like music and mourning. It was her mother's name. Gasps rose around her. The girls turned, whispering to each other, recognizing the importance of what had just been done. One girl, a quiet 17-year-old named Kiera, who hadn't spoken more than 10 words since arriving, whispered, She was real. Mavis nodded. She was. And now the world remembers. We as first Tukin now. After the unveiling, they held the first official class inside the Lila Green Center. Not math, not science, but history their own. Mavis handed each girl a small, blank notebook. This is your story, she said. Write it as you remember it, as you felt it, as you want it to be remembered. Do we have to write about the bad stuff? One girl asked. No, Mavis said. But don't be afraid to. There's no shame in surviving. She watched as each girl cracked open her notebook. Some began to write. Some just stared at the blank page, the way she once had. Later that evening, Mavis walked through the center alone. Her fingers grazed the edges of fresh paint, smooth wood, the spine of a donated book. She stopped at the back of the building, where one small room had been left mostly untouched. A single desk, one chair, a framed photo on the wall. Her mother, standing barefoot in a kitchen, flour dust on her cheeks, smiling like she was telling a joke. Below the photo were the words, "What you build, girl, they can't take away." It had been her mother's favorite phrase. Mavis stepped into the room, closed the door, and let herself feel it all. The losses, the survival, the new beginning. That night, she sat on the porch with Harold. "You made her proud today," he said. "I hope so." He looked out at the girls playing in the distance. "What now?" Mavis didn't answer right away. Then, "There are still too many places like where I was," she said. "Towns with nothing but silence. Girls with no one listening. We need more juniper houses. More lila greens." Harold smiled. "You're going national?" "Eventually," she nodded. "But first, I want to go back." "To the city?" "No," she said softly. "To the alley where I almost died. I want to leave something there." He looked at her gently. "Closure?" "Justice." A week later, she did. Jerome drove her into the heart of Houston, to the alley behind the building where she had been found, cold, bleeding, alone. She stepped out quietly, wearing the same boots she had walked out of the hospital in. The alley was smaller than she remembered, but no less heavy. She placed a plaque on the wall, quiet, bronze, permanent, in honor of the ones who weren't found. "This is not the end of you. Keep going." Beneath it, a small symbol. A juniper branch. A symbol of resilience. She stood back and exhaled. Behind her, a woman with a shopping cart paused, reading the plaque. Her eyes met Mavis's. Something silent passed between them. Recognition. Survival. Then the woman gave the smallest nod. Mavis nodded back. That evening, back at Juniper House, Mavis walked the halls. A new girl had arrived, bruised, quiet, but curious. She clutched a stuffed rabbit and watched Mavis from the staircase. "Do you live here?" the girl asked. Mavis smiled. "No, I belong here." 9. And for the first time in her life, she truly believed it. The house was still when Mavis awoke before dawn. The halls of Juniper House, usually filled with laughter and voices and the patter of bare feet, were quiet, breathing slowly like a sleeping giant. Rain tapped gently on the roof, soft and steady, the kind of morning made for remembering. She dressed without turning on the lights. Jeans, a cotton sweater, boots. In the mirror, she saw the lines around her eyes, the fullness of her face now no longer hollow, no longer haunted. Her body had healed. Her heart had learned to carry the cracks. Downstairs, in the study off the library, a box waited. She'd been avoiding it for months. Tucked behind stacks of grant proposals and expansion plans, beneath old journals and unopened letters. The box had one word written across it, in faded permanent marker: Mavis. Unsent. Letters, dozens of them. Pages and pages she had written over the years but never mailed. Some were addressed to Harold during the time she thought he had forgotten her. Some to her mother, long dead. Some to herself. She pulled out the top one. "Dear Harold, I don't know if you ever really loved me. Maybe I was just the girl who swept the stairs and kept quiet. But I used to imagine that you did, that maybe, just once, you looked at me and saw more than someone who served your family. Today, they locked me in the basement again. Lydia said I took too long folding napkins. I'm bleeding. I'm scared. But I won't cry. Not where they can see." She folded it, trembling slightly. That letter was dated 9 years ago. Then another. "Dear Mama, I wore your ring again today. I didn't take it off, not even when they scrubbed my hands raw. Sometimes I pretend you're watching, that you'd be proud of the way I don't scream anymore. But Mama, what if I'm disappearing? What if I can't come back?" And then one, crumpled and water-stained, addressed simply, "To the girl I was, I'm sorry, for doubting you, for letting them make you believe you were trash, for not fighting sooner. But I need you to know, we made it. Tears slipped down Mavis's face, quiet and hot. She spread the letters out on the desk. Dozens of fragments of herself, finally seen. She didn't want to throw them away. She wanted to set them free. Later that day, with the girls gathered under the big oak tree in the courtyard, Mavis brought out a small wooden box. She asked them to write letters to themselves, to people who hurt them, to people they missed. You don't have to send it, she said. But sometimes, letting it out is the first way back to yourself, they wrote in silence. Even the stubborn ones, even Kiara, who barely ever spoke, wrote a single sentence. I didn't deserve it. At sunset, they placed the letters into the fire pit. No ceremony, no big speech, just release. Mavis placed hers in last, a final letter, written the night before. Dear Lydia, I forgive you, not for your sake, not because you asked, but because I refuse to carry your weight any longer. I am not your wound. I am not your secret. I am not your shame. I am free, and you cannot follow me here. The flame caught quickly. The fire didn't rage, it burned low, steady, determined, much like her. Later, Mavis sat with Jerome and Harold on the back porch. The stars overhead blinked gently through a break in the clouds. I've been thinking, she said, about legacy. Harold raised a brow. You've built one. Look around. I don't mean just the house, she said. I mean, when we're gone, what do they carry forward? Jerome took a slow sip of coffee. Truth, integrity, safety, community. That's legacy. She nodded. But I want to go further, she said. I want to start a mentorship program, not just for girls here, for alumni, for survivors who've made it and want to reach back. Harold leaned forward, firelight in his eyes. A chain that doesn't break. Exactly. She could see it already. Older girls returning each summer to teach classes, a cycle of strength, a network of women who didn't just survive, they rebuilt others. We'll call it the Juniper Line, she said. Because even in the hardest winters, those trees don't die. They bend, they hold. Jerome smiled. You just keep rewriting what it means to grow up black and invisible in this country. Mavis looked out into the night. No one's invisible anymore, she said softly. Not if I have anything to say about it. That night, she placed one final letter on her bedside table. To the woman I am becoming, I don't know all your battles yet, but I trust you to fight them. I know you will walk through fire, again and again, and still come out glowing. I'm proud of you already. Mavis. She turned off the lamp. Outside her window, a breeze stirred the juniper trees, and somewhere inside her, the past finally let go. The day Juniper House turned 2 years old, the air was filled with a different kind of music, laughter, guitars, spoons clinking against punch glasses. It wasn't loud. It wasn't grand. It was something far more sacred. It was joy. The courtyard had been decorated with banners the girls made themselves, crooked lettering, too much glitter, but every phrase was carved from truth. We made it. This is what survival looks like. Home isn't walls, it's people who listen. Mavis stood quietly at the edge of the garden, watching it all. 25 girls had come and gone through Juniper House. Some stayed only months, others longer. Many had written back. One girl now studied law. Another was running a food truck. One, who hadn't spoken in 6 years, now taught poetry to middle schoolers. And one had adopted a stray dog and named it Mavis. Mavis laughed when she read that letter. She never thought her name would live on in ways like that, not on buildings or bank accounts, but in rescued pets and saved lives and handwritten notes taped to mirrors. Today was more than an anniversary. It was the beginning of something even bigger. The ceremony wasn't fancy. There was no press, no ribbon cutting, just people who had made it through fire, gathering under trees, holding plates full of cornbread and barbecue. Harold gave a short speech, despite grumbling that he didn't want to. I've sat in a lot of boardrooms, he said, and none of them smelled like sweet tea and nail polish remover. The girls giggled. That's how I know this one matters. Jerome read a poem a girl had written before she left. They said I was broken, but broken things still shine in the sun, still hold water, still whisper truth, still come home. Then, the oldest girl still living at Juniper House, Bria, stood up nervous, eyes scanning the crowd. She held a small box. "Mavis," she said, walking toward her. "We made something for you." Mavis tilted her head. "For me?" Inside the box was a necklace. At its center, a single polished juniper seed, carved with tiny initials, LG. "Lila Green," Bria said, voice steady. "Your mama. You carry her. We carry you." My. For the first time in a long time, Mavis cried in front of them, not from pain, from being seen. That evening, after the sun dipped behind the trees and the lanterns lit up the paths around Juniper House, Mavis stood alone in the garden. Everything she'd built had grown beyond her. There were whispers of a second house already funded, plans to train new directors, former residents offering to return and help the next generation. It was happening quietly, fiercely, not a revolution in the streets, but a sanctuary in the shadows. She walked past the Lila Green Center. The windows glowed warm. Inside, 2 girls were painting. One sang softly, another laughed. She reached the old rocking chair on the porch, sat down, closed her eyes, and listened. No screaming, no slamming doors, no footsteps of someone coming to take everything from her. Just wind in the trees, just peace. From somewhere deep inside the house, a small voice called, "Miss Mavis?" She looked up. A little girl, barely 7, shy, stood holding a book. "Can you read this to me?" Mavis smiled. "Of course." She rose slowly, followed the girl inside, past the fireplace, past the hallway where framed photos now hung, pictures of every girl who had lived there. Grinning, strong, she took a seat in the reading room. The girl climbed onto her lap, curling into her. Mavis opened the book and began to read. Her voice was steady, and somewhere between the words, she realized, she hadn't just built a house, she'd built a world, one where justice wasn't loud but constant, where survival wasn't the end but the beginning, where love didn't ask you to earn it, where girls like her weren't the help, or the forgotten, or the discarded. They were the future, and they finally had a home. This story teaches us that true legacy isn't built on wealth, but on compassion, resilience, and the courage to stand up for those who've been silenced. Mavis's journey from abandonment to leadership reminds us that healing is possible not only for ourselves, but for entire communities. When we choose to face the past, speak the truth, and build spaces where others can be seen, heard, and loved. In a world quick to discard the broken, Juniper House stands as proof. What is wounded can still become whole, and what is whole can help others rise.